moments. For 31. 2. Immediate quantity is continuous magnitude. Remark. The usual separation of these magnitudes 432. Space, time, matter, etc. are continuous magnitudes which possess the absolute possibility that the one may be posited in them. For 33. Continuous and discrete magnitude can be regarded as species of quantity. See limitation of quantity 434. Discrete magnitude has first the one for its principle. Secondly, it is a plurality of ones. And thirdly, it is essentially continuous. For 35. This limit, which is related to the unity and is the negation in it, is also, as the one, self-related. For 36. Since the one which is a limit includes within itself the many ones of discrete quantity, it equally posits them as sublated within it. Chapter 2 Quantum 437. Quantum, which to begin with is quantity with a determinateness or limit in general, is, in its complete determinateness, number. A number 438. Quantity is quantum or has a limit, both as continuous and as discrete magnitude. For 39. The very nature of quantity is to be indifferent to its limit. But equally, quantity is not unaffected by the limit. For 40. This one is thus the principle of quantum but as the one of quantity. For 41. Quantum completely posited in these determinations is number. For 42. Amount and unit constitute the moments of number. For 43. The number is not a plurality over against the enclosing, limiting one, but itself constitutes this limitation. For 44. The contradiction of number or of quantum as such within itself is the quality of quantum. Remark 1. The species of calculation in arithmetic. Kant's synthetic propositions a priori 445. Spatial magnitude and numerical magnitude are regarded as two species, the former being a determinate magnitude just as much as the latter. For 46. Arithmetic considers number and its figures, or rather does not consider them but operates with them. For 47. Number has for its principle the one and is, therefore, simply an aggregate externally put together, devoid of any inner connectedness. For 48. The qualitative difference which constitutes the determinateness of number is that of unit and amount. For 49. Numbers can be produced in two ways, either by aggregation or by separation of an aggregate already given. For 50. 1. After these remarks we proceed to indicate the species of calculation. For 51. The number produced by counting are in turn themselves counted. For 52. Kant considers the proposition 7 plus 5 is equal to 12 to be a synthetic proposition. For 53. Counting is not determined by sensation which, according to Kant's definition of intuition, is all that remains over for the a posteriors. For 54. Kant's assertion of the synthetic nature of the foundations of pure geometry is equally without any solid basis. For 55. Kant's notion of synthetic a priori judgments belongs to what is great and imperishable in his philosophy. For 56. The negative species of calculation corresponding to addition, subtraction, is the wholly analytical separation into numbers. For 57. 2. The next determination is the equality of the numbers which are to be counted. For 58. Division is the negative species of calculation with the same determination of the difference. For 59. 3. The two numbers related to each other as unit and amount are still immediate with respect to each other and therefore unequal. For 60. A graded instruction based on a logically formed division of the subject treats of powers before it treats of proportions. For 61. Philosophy must be able to distinguish what is an intrinsically self-external material. Remark 2. The employment of numerical distinctions for expressing philosophical notions 462. Pythagoras represented rational relationships, or philosophemata, by numbers. For 63. Number is the absolute determinateness of quantity. For 64. Number is at the same time the abstraction of the manifoldness of sense. For 65. The mind which rises above the world of the senses and contemplates its own essence may therefore happen on number. For 66. When what is most alive are transposed into this element of pure self-externality, they become dead, inert determinations. For 67. The richer in relationships thoughts become, the more confused and meaningless becomes their representation in numbers. For 68. Thought is set its hardest task when the movement of the notion through which alone it is the notion, is denoted by numbers. For 69. In symbols the truth is dimmed and veiled by the sensuous element. Only in the form of thought is it fully revealed. For 70. In the concrete philosophical sciences philosophy must take the logical element from logic, not from mathematics. For 71. Machines can perform arithmetical operations. So much for the idea of making calculation the means for educating the mind and stretching it on the rack in order to perfect it as a machine. B. Extensive and intensive quantum A. Their difference 472. 1. Quantum has its determinateness as limit in amount. For 73. The direct opposite of extensive magnitude is not discrete but intensive magnitude. For 74. 2. The determinateness of something in terms of number does not require it to be distinguished from another numerically determined something. For 75. The limit of quantum passes over into simple determinateness. For 76. The degree is thus a specific magnitude, a quantum. For 77. 3. In number, quantum is posited in its complete determinateness, but as intensive quantum. For 78. None of the various distinct degrees is separate from the others but each is determined only through them. B. Identity of extensive and intensive magnitude 479. Degree is not external to itself within itself. For 80. The determinateness of intensive magnitude is, therefore, to be considered from two sides. For 81. Extensive and intensive magnitude are thus one and the same determinateness of quantum. For 82. The qualitative something makes its appearance, for the identity is the unity which is self-related through the negation of its differences. Remark 1. Examples of this identity 483. Extensive and intensive quantum are usually distinguished in the ordinary conception of them as kinds of magnitude. For 84. In the conversion of the mechanical into the dynamic view, there occurs the concept of separately existing independent parts. For 85. The other determinateness which occurs here is the quantitative as such. For 86. Number itself necessarily has this double form immediately within it. For 87. In the circle the one is called degree because the determinateness of any part of the circle derives from the many parts outside it. For 88. The magnitude of a more concrete object exhibits its dual aspects of being extensive and intensive. For 89. A higher degree of temperature expresses itself as a longer column of mercury. For 90. A larger surface can be colored with a more intensive color than with a weaker color used in the same way. For 91. In the spiritual sphere, high intensity of character is bound up with a correspondingly far-reaching reality in the outer world. Remark 2. The determination of degree as applied by Kant to the soul 492. The determinateness of intensive quantum has been applied by Kant in a peculiar way to a metaphysical determination of the soul. C. Alteration of quantum 493. The difference between extensive and intensive quantum is indifferent to the determinateness of quantum as such. For 94. A quantum, therefore, in accordance with its quality, is posited in absolute continuity with its externality, with its otherness. For 95. The one is infinite or self-related negation, hence the repulsion of itself from itself. For 96. Thus quantum impels itself beyond itself. See quantitative infinity, A. Its notion 497. Quantum alters and becomes another quantum. For 98. Finitude and infinity each acquire in themselves a dual, and indeed an opposite meaning. For 99. Qualitative determinateness as an immediacy is related to otherness essentially as to an alien being. B. The qualitative infinite progress 500. The progress to infinity is the expression of contradiction, here of quantum as such. 501. The infinite progress is only the expression of this contradiction, not its resolution. 502. The continuity of quantum with its other produces the conjunction of both in the expression of an infinitely great or infinitely small. 503. This infinity which is perpetually determined as the beyond of the finite is the spurious quantitative infinite. Remark 1. The high repute of the progress to infinity. 504. The spurious infinite is commonly held to be something sublime, while in philosophy it has been regarded as ultimate. 505. Kant at the close of the Critique of Practical Reason. 506. This exposition deserves praise mainly on account of truthfulness. 507. Haller's description of eternity called by Kant terrifying. 508. This heaping and piling up of numbers is regarded as what is valuable in a description of eternity. 509. Astronomers pride themselves on the sublimity of their science because it has to deal with an innumerable host of stars. 510. To the infinity of outer, sensuous intuition, Kant opposes the other infinite. 511. The ego in being thus alone with itself is, it is true, the reached beyond. 512. Kant declares those exaltations to be unsatisfying for reason, which cannot stop at them. 513. The ego in its self-determining proceeds to determine nature and liberate itself therefrom. 514. Ego and non-ego, or the pure will and the moral law, are presupposed as completely self-subsistent and mutually indifferent. 515. The standpoint is powerless to overcome the qualitative opposition between the finite and infinite. 516. In Fichte's theory of science, the first axiom is ego equals ego. 517. Only in the qualitative opposition does the posited infinitude emerge and the quantitative determination itself pass over into the qualitative. Remark 2. The Kantian antinomy of the limitation and non-limitation of the world. 518. The Kantian antinomies are expositions of the opposition of finite and infinite in a more concrete shape. 519. This antinomy concerns the limitation or non-limitation of the world in time and space. 520. The antinomy is two simple opposite assertions. There is a limit and the limit must be transcended. 521. The other part of the proof which concerns space is based on time. 522. The basis of the proof itself is the direct assertion of what was to be proved. 523. The assumed limit of time is a now as end of the time already elapsed. 524. In truth, time is pure quantity. 525. The antithesis. 526. The assumption is made that the world as an existence presupposes another conditioned existence in time, and so on to infinity. 527. The proof regarding the infinity of the world in space is the same. 528. Thesis and antithesis are nothing but the opposite assertions, that a limit is, and that the limit equally is only a sublated one. 529. The solution of these antinomies, as of those previously mentioned, is transcendental. C. The infinity of quantum. 530. 1. The infinite quantum as infinitely great or infinitely small is itself implicitly the infinite progress. 531. Quantum as degree is unitary, self-related and determinate within itself. 532. But this is what quantum as such is in itself. 533. Let us take the progress at first in its abstract determinations as we find them. 534. The first sublation, the negation of quality as such whereby quantum is posited, is in principle the sublating of the negation. 535. The infinite, which in the infinite progress has only the empty meaning of a non-being, is in fact nothing else than quality. 536. Quantum is sublated quality, but quantum is infinite. 537. Quantum as self-related as an indifferent limit in its externality and therefore posited as qualitative, is quantitative ratio. Remark 1. The specific nature of the notion of the mathematical infinite. 538. The introduction of the mathematical infinite has led to important results, but mathematics has not succeeded in justifying its use. 539. Mathematics, being unaware of the nature of its instrument, is unable to determine the scope of its application. 540. The science of mathematics can only defend itself by denying the competence of metaphysics. 541. Mathematics finds a radical contradiction to that very method which is peculiar to itself and on which as a science it rests. 542. Mathematics shows that results obtained by the use of the infinite agree with those found by the strictly mathematical method. 543. Consideration of justifications and characteristics of the mathematical infinite I shall undertake at some length in this remark. 544. The usual definition of the mathematical infinite is that it is a magnitude than which there is no greater. 545. It is the reflection that quantum is sublated which is usually not made, and which creates the difficulty for ordinary thinking. 546. Kant finds the said definition does not accord with what is understood by an infinite whole. 547. Kant objects to infinite wholes being regarded as a maximum. 548. Kant's concept of infinite he calls truly transcendental. 549. The character of the mathematical infinite and the way it is used in analysis corresponds to the notion of the genuine infinite. 550. The infinite quantum contains within itself first externality and secondly the negation of it. 551. The notion of the infinite as abstractly expounded here will show itself to be the basis of the mathematical infinite. 552. A fractional number, 27 for example, is not a quantum like 1, 2, 3, etc., but is directly determined by two other numbers. 553. The representation of infinity by a fractional number is still imperfect. 554. Letters, the next universality into which numbers are raised, are only general symbols and indeterminate possibilities. 555. The ratio first is a quantum, secondly, this quantum is not immediate but contains qualitative opposition. 556. The fraction 27 can be expressed as 0.285714. 1 as 1 plus a plus a 2 plus a 3 etc. 557. The series is itself infinite. 558. The nature of this infinity of the series is the spurious infinity of the progression. 559. In the infinite series, inexactitude is actually present, whereas in the mathematical infinite there is only appearance of inexactitude. 560. The infinite series contains the spurious infinity. 561. In the infinite series the negative is outside its terms which are present only qua parts of the amount. 562. The existence of infinite series which cannot be summed is external and contingent with respect to the form of series as such. 563. The terminological inversion with the fraction and its expression as a series also occurs in the mathematical infinite. 564. Spinoza opposes the concept of true infinity to that of the spurious. 565. With Spinoza, substance and its absolute unity has the form of an inert unity. 566. The mathematical example with which Spinoza illustrates the true infinite is the space between two unequal eccentric circles. 593. The procedure is made to depend on the qualitative meaning. 594. Carnot gives a most lucid exposition of what is essential in the ideas referred to above. 595. Lagrange reverted to Newton's original method of series to be relieved of the difficulties inherent in the idea of the infinitely small. 596. The demonstrated qualitative character of the form of magnitude in the infinitesimal is found in the category of limit of the ratio. 597. The very expression limit implies that it is a limit of something. 598. The idea of limit is supposed to have the advantage of avoiding the inconsistency here involved. 599. 600. We shall discuss the confusion which the conception of approximation currently used in expositions of the calculus. 601. The so-called infinitesimals express the vanishing of the sides of the ratio as quanta. 602. The limit here does not have the meaning of ratio. It counts only as the final value. 603. The increments or infinitesimals have been considered only from the side of the quantum which vanishes in them. 604. Analogous is the assumption that infinitely small parts of the same whole are equal to each other. 605. Propositions are put forward as results of calculus, without inquiry whether by and in themselves they have a real significance. 606. Much has been accepted as proof for no other reason than that the result was always already known beforehand. 607. The empty scaffolding of such proofs was erected in order to prove physical laws. Remark 2. The purpose of the differential calculus deduced from its application 608. The so-called application presents greater difficulties, but also the more interesting side. The elements of this concrete side are to be the object of this remark. 609. The method of the differential calculus shows on the face of it that it was not invented and constructed for its own sake. 610. The nature of the infinitesimal is the qualitative nature of determinations of quantity which are related to each other as quanta. 611. The specifically qualitative character of quantity is first indicated in the quantitative relation as such. 612. The core of the whole business is the actual procedure in the mathematical solution of a certain group of problems. 613. Equations in which any number of magnitudes, here we confine ourselves to 2, are combined into a qualitative whole. 614. The magnitudes have simply and solely the character of variables such as occur in the problems of indeterminate analysis. 615. The difference between variables in calculus is that at least one of those variables is found in a power higher than the first. 616. B. We have now to indicate what is the interest on which the treatment of the equation is focused. 617. The sole point of importance here is the qualitative determinateness of the terms. 618. The binomial xn equals y plus z, n equals yn plus New York, n1, z plus. 619. The object is an equation ym equals xn. 620. The representation of these functions of potentiation of a variable is taken as a sum complex within itself. 621. The increment is supposed to be not a quantum but only a form, the whole value of which is that it assists the development. 622. For what purpose are such functions sought? 623. The answer follows directly and automatically from the nature of the matter. 624. The appearance of arbitrariness of the differential calculus is clarified by awareness of where its application is permissible. 625. For the determination of its moment we shall take the simplest example from equations of the second degree. 626. The equations between these lines and the coordinate are linear equations. 627. The first discoverers could only record their findings in a wholly empirical manner. 628. The power forms in the equation are reduced to their first functions, but the value of the terms of the equation is thereby altered. 629. Lagrange rejected this pretense and took the genuinely scientific course. 630. I must also mention the tangential method of Descartes, if only for its beauty and its fame. 631. The final equation obtained in this way is the same as that obtained by the method of the differential calculus. 632. The omission of the constant has the meaning that the constant plays no part in the determination of the roots if these are equal. 633. To differentiate denotes that differences are posited. In integration, on the other hand, the constant must be added in again. 634. Another important sphere in which the differential calculus is employed is mechanics. 635. The erroneous assumption that 2 is part of the motion regarded as a sum gives the false appearance of a physical proposition. 636. The motion represented by the equation S equals at 2 we find, says Lagrange, empirically in falling bodies. 637. The application of the differential calculus to the elementary equations of motion does not of itself offer any real interest. 638. The aim has been to make prominent and to establish the simple, specific nature of the differential calculus and to demonstrate it. 639. The other part of the problem of the calculus appears in connection with its formal operation, namely the application of the latter. 640. The problem now is to determine which of the moments determining the subject matter is given in the equation itself. 641. The differentiation of an equation of several variables yields the differential coefficient, not as an equation but only as a ratio. 642. The usual method makes the matter easy for itself by using the idea of the infinitesimal difference. 643. The rectified arc stands to a certain function given by the equation of the curve, in the relation of the original function to its derivative. 644. It is the derived function which in integral calculus is given relatively to the original, which has first to be found by integration. 645. It is superficial to say that the integral calculus is simply the converse problem of the differential calculus. 646. Lagrange did not smooth over the difficulties of its problems simply by making those direct assumptions. 647. Lagrange's rectification of curves provides an insight into the translation of the Archimedean method into modern analysis. 648. The idea of the infinitesimal occurs in Archimedes' method, as well as later in Kepler's treatment of stereometric objects. 649. In these methods, the affirmative aspect as such which is veiled by the merely negative determination fails to be recognized. 650. Each mode of calculation has as its subject matter a specific determinateness. So too has the differential and integral calculus. 651. Differential and integral calculus has a more particular interest in common with series, to determine the coefficients of the terms. Remark 3. Further forms connected with the qualitative determinateness of magnitude. 652. The infinitesimal of the differential calculus is, in its affirmative meaning, the qualitative determinateness of magnitude. 653. From the analytical side, the different power determinations appear in the first place as only formal and quite homogeneous. 654. The sole interest of this procedure is to determine the points and the lines into which the lines and planes have been resolved. 655. It is the need to have recourse to the infinitely small which constitute the greatest difficulty. 656. It will now be evident how the qualitative element here considered differs from the subject of the previous remark. 657. The alleged pure summation does in fact include a multiplication. 658. Representing planes as sums of lines is also often employed when multiplication as such is not used to produce the result. 659. The area of a circle bears the same proportion to the area of an ellipse, as the major axis does to the minor axis. 660. The criterion for Cavalari's method of indivisibles referred to above equally is justified by it. 661. This leads us to reflect on the difference which exists with respect to that feature into which the determinateness of a figure falls. 662. Cavalari means to distinguish what belongs to the outer existence of the continuous figure from its determinateness. 663. This form of coincidence is a childish aid for sense perception. 664. With parallel lines and with parallelograms there enters another factor. 665. Tackett asked which line, in the calculation of conical and spherical surfaces, should be taken as the basis. 666. These objections have their origin in the idea of the infinite aggregate of points of which the line is supposed to consist. 667. The affirmative meanings, in the various applications of the infinitely small in mathematics, remain in the background. 668. The introduction of the infinite which is meant to remove the difficulty only serves to aggravate it and prevent its solution. Chapter 3. The quantitative relation. 669. The infinite quantum as the unity of both moments of the quantitative and qualitative determinateness is a ratio. 670. In the ratio, quantum is no longer merely indifferent but is qualitatively determined as simply related to its beyond. 671. This relation is itself also a magnitude. The quantum is not only in a ratio but it is itself posited as a ratio. 672. Ratio as such is direct ratio, indirect or inverse ratio, and in the ratio of powers becomes measure. 673. It only remains therefore to expound the abstract notion of these ratios. The direct ratio. 674. 1. In the direct ratio the determinateness of either quantum lies reciprocally in the determinateness of the other. 675. 2. The exponent is any quantum, but it is self-related in its own externality and a qualitatively determined quantum. 676. The exponent is this difference as a simple determinateness, i.e. it has immediately within it the significance of both. 677. 3. The two therefore constitute strictly only one quantum. 678. The exponent ought to be the complete quantum, since the determination of both sides coincides in it. B inverse ratio. 679. The ratio as now before us is the sublated direct relation. 680. In the inverse ratio, the exponent as quantum is likewise immediate and is any quantum assumed as fixed. 681. The ratio is so determined that the amount as such is altered relatively to the other side of the ratio, to the unit. 682. 2. We have now to consider more closely this qualitative nature of the inverse ratio, more particularly in its realization. 683. In conformity with these determinations, each of the two moments has its limit within the exponent. 684. This continuity of each in the other constitutes the moment of unity through which they are in ratio. 685. The exponent is a limit of the sides of its ratio within which they increase and decrease relatively to each other. 686. 3. The outcome of this, however, is the transition of the inverse ratio into a different determination from that which it had at first. 687. The ratio is now specified as the ratio of powers. See the ratio of powers 688. 1. The quantum has reached the stage of being for self. 689. The exponent of this ratio is no longer an immediate quantum as it is in the direct ratio and also in the inverse ratio. 690. 2. The ratio of powers appears at first to be an external alteration to which any quantum can be subjected. 691. The quality of quantum as the posited difference of itself from itself is simply this, to be a ratio. 692. 3. But with the positing of quantum in conformity with its notion, it has undergone transition into another determination. 693. At first, then, quantity as such appears in opposition to quality. 694. This is the truth of quantum to be measure. Remark 695. The remark to be made here concerns the intrusion of quantitative forms into the pure qualitative forms of thought in philosophy. 696. There is just as much to be said against powers as against all symbolism whatever philosophy. 697. Philosophy needs no help from the world of sense or products of the imagination in its own peculiar province. 698. The use of numbers, the mathematical infinite, and such like is nothing more than a convenient means of evading the task of grasping the notion. Section 3. Measure 699. Abstractly expressed, in measure quality and quantity are united. 700. Thirdly, we now have self-related externality. 701. Kant did not apply triplicity to the genera of his categories, but only to their species which alone he called categories. 702. With Spinoza, the mode is likewise the third after substance and attribute. 703. In Indian pantheism, Brahma, abstract thought, progresses through Vishnu, particularly in the form of Krishna, to a third form, Shiva. 704. The mode itself is declared to belong essentially to the substantial nature of a thing. 705. Mode has the specific meaning of measure. Spinoza's mode, like the Indian principle of change, is the measureless. 706. Measure in its more developed, more reflected form is necessity. 707. Measure, having realized its own notion, has passed into essence. 708. At first, measure is only an immediate unity of quality and quantity. 709. Natural science is still far from an insight into the connection between quantities and the organic functions on which they depend. 710. In the realm of spirit, there is still less to be found a characteristic, free development of measure. Chapter 1 Specific Quantity 711. Qualitative quantity in the first place an immediate, specific quantum. The specific quantum 712. 1. Measure is the simple relation of the quantum to itself, its own determinateness within itself. The quantum is thus qualitative. 713. All that exists has a measure. 714. Measure as a standard is a quantum arbitrarily assumed as the intrinsically determinate unit relative to an external amount. 715. Immediate measure is a simple quantitative determination. 716. Quantitative determinateness is twofold: that to which the quality is tied and that which can be varied without affecting the quality. 717. Because quantum is posited as the external limit which is by its nature alterable, and so alteration requires no explanation. 718. 2. The sudden conversion into a change of quality of a change which was apparently merely quantitative attracted the attention of the ancients. 719. Does the pulling out of a single hair from the head produce baldness? 720. The contradiction which results is not a sophism, for such contradiction is not a sham or a deception. 721. What is refuted is the error of one-sidedly holding fast to the abstract determinateness of quantum. 722. Quantum, as an indifferent limit, is the aspect of an existence which leaves it open to unsuspected attack and destruction. 723. 3. Measure in its immediacy is an ordinary quality with a specific magnitude attaching to it. B. Specifying measure. 724. This is first a rule, a measure which is external with reference to mere quantum. A. The rule. 725. Comparison is an external act, the unit itself being an arbitrary magnitude. B. Specifying measure. 726. Measure is a specific determining of the external. 727. Something, insofar as it is a measure within itself, has the magnitude of its quality altered from outside itself. 728. Intensive and extensive quantum is the same quantum, once in the form of intensity and again in the form of extension. 729. The strictly immanent qualitative form of the quantum is solely its determination as a power. Remark. 730. Temperature is a quality in which these two sides of external and specified quantum are distinguished. See relation of the two sides as qualities. 731. 1. The qualitative, intrinsically determinate side of the quantum exists only as a relation to the externally quantitative side. 732. 2. In measure there enters the essential determination of variable magnitude, for measure is quantum as sublated. 733. Magnitude, simply as magnitude, is alterable. 734. The two sides thus related have, in keeping with their abstract aspect as qualities generally, some particular significance. 735. The direct ratio is reduced to the merely formal determination which has no existence except as an intellectual abstraction. Remark. 736. These kinds of motion, no less than their laws, rest on the development of the notion of their moments of space and time. 737. It is a great service to ascertain the empirical numbers of nature, but an infinitely greater service to make them moments of a law. See Being for Self in measure. 738. 1. In the form of specified measure, the quantitative element of both sides is qualitatively determined. 739. The immediate qualities also belong to measure. 740. 2. It is still with reference to the specific measure an externally given quantum. 741. 3. Measure has now acquired the character of a specified quantitative relation which, as qualitative, has in it the ordinary external quantum. Chapter 2. Real measure. 742. Measure is now determined as a correlation of measures which constitute the quality of distinct self-subsistent somethings, or things. 743. Self-exclusive and self-subsistent measure are one with each other, and self-subsistent measure enters into a negative relation with itself. The relation of self-subsistent measures. 744. Measures are no longer merely immediate but self-subsistent, because they have become relations of measures which are themselves specified. A combination of two measures. 745. Something is immanently determined as a measure relation of quanta which also possess qualities. 746. The exponent is the specific quantum of the something. 747. As purely quantitatively determined, the compound would be a mere addition of the two magnitudes. 748. Not only is one of the qualitative sides posited as alterable but measure itself. B. Measure of a series of measure relations. 749. 1. If two things forming a compound body owed their natures to a simple qualitative determination, they would destroy each other when combined. 750. 2. This combination with a number of others which are likewise measures within themselves yields different ratios. 751. It seems that a self-subsistent measure which forms a series of exponents with a series of such measures is distinguished from another measure. 752. Those measures which yield a series of exponents of the ratios between the members of that series are in themselves self-subsistent measures. 753. 3. In this form there is a return to the particular way in which quantum is posited as self-determined, i.e. as degree. C. Elective affinity. 754. The individual note is the key of a system, but again it is equally an individual member in the system of every other key. 755. In elective affinity as an exclusive qualitative correlation, the relationship is rid of this quantitative difference. 756. Neutralization is not only the form of intensity. The exponent is essentially a measure determination and therefore exclusive. Remark, Bert Hollett on chemical affinity and Berzelius's theory of it. 757. Chemical substances are the most characteristic examples of measures which are characterized solely by their relationship to other measures. 758. The law of the chemical affinities of acids and alkalis states that if two neutral solutions are mixed, resulting the products are neutral. 759. Bert Hollett modified the general conception of elective affinity by the concept of the activity of a chemical mass. 760. Berzelius in his textbook of chemistry. 761. Berzelius himself makes use of the conception of degrees of affinity. 762. Affinity is reduced to a quantitative difference. 763. Chemical affinity has been distinguished from elective affinity. 764. If the experimental method has been the guiding star in the theory of proportions, then mixing with the corpuscular theory, a desert lying away from the path of experience, forms all the greater contrast with it. 765. Every chemical action is at bottom an electrical phenomenon. 766. It is just this kind of metaphysics which is proclaimed and echoed too with the greatest pretension. 767. The problem would be to recognize the exponents of the ratios of the series of specific gravities as a system based on a rule. 768. When substances are combined, there occurs also a neutralization of the specific gravities. B. Nodal line of measure relations. 769. The last determination of the measure relation was that being specific it is exclusive. 770. The relation to itself of the measure relation is distinct from its externality which represents its quantitative aspect. 771. They form in this way a nodal line of measures on a scale of more and less. 772. Here we have a measure relation, a self-subsistent reality which is qualitatively distinguished from others. 773. People fondly try to make an alteration comprehensible by means of the gradualness of the transition. Remark, examples of such nodal lines. The maxim, nature does not make leaps. 774. The system of natural numbers already shows a nodal line of qualitative moments which emerge in a merely external succession. 775. Qualitative nodes and leaps occur in chemical combinations when the mixture proportions are progressively altered. 776. It is said, natura non facit saltum. 777. In thinking about the coming to be of something, it is assumed that what comes to be is already sensibly or actually in existence. 778. With the expansion of the state and an increased number of citizens, the laws and the Constitution acquire a different significance. See the measureless. 779. Magnitude is that side of determinate being through which it can be caught up in a seemingly harmless entanglement which can destroy it. 780. The abstract measureless is the quantum as such which lacks an inner significance. 781. This transition of the qualitative and the quantitative into each other proceeds on the basis of their unity. 782. The alteration is only change of a state, and the subject of the transition is posited as remaining the same in the process. 783. Measure is, in the first instance, only the immediate unity of quality and quantity as an ordinary quantum which is, however, specific. 784. This process is equally the progressive determination of measure in its realization and the reduction of measure to the status of a moment. Chapter 3. The Becoming of Essence. A. Absolute Indifference. 785. Being is the abstract equivalence in which there is supposed to be as yet no determinateness of any kind. 786. What has thus been determined as qualitative and external is only a vanishing determinateness. Be indifference as an inverse ratio of its factors. 787. This determination of indifference is posited within the indifference itself, and how the latter is therewith posited as being for itself. 788. 1. The reduction of measure relations, which at first ranked as self-subsistent measures, establishes their common substrate. 789. At first it is essentially the merely quantitative external difference which is present in it. 790. The difference is present, further, as two qualities, one of which is sublated by the other. 791. Each side is in its own self an inverted relation. As formal, this relation recurs in the two distinct sides. 792. 2. As this indifference, being is now the specification of measure no longer in its immediacy, but measure as developed. 793. The determinations come into immediate opposition, and this develops itself into a contradiction. 794. 3. Each quality enters within each side into relation to the other. 795. There can be no question of a quantitative difference or of a more of the one quality. 796. This unity has for its result not the unity which is merely indifferent, but that immanently negative and absolute unity called essence. Remark. Centripetal and centrifugal force. 797. The relationship of quantitative difference of two factors determined qualitatively is applied to the elliptical motion of the celestial bodies. 798. All that can properly be required of a theory has been accomplished, but to reflective understanding this did not appear sufficient. 799. It is evident that it would be an alien force which effected this reversal. 800. The same has been applied to the forces of attraction and repulsion to explain the different densities of bodies. 801. With Spinoza attributes, thought and extension, then the modes too, the affections are introduced quite empirically. 802. It is the dissolution of measure in which both moments were directly posited as one. See transition into essence. 803. This reflection of differences into their unity is not the product of the subjective thinker, but it is their very nature to sublate themselves. 804. The process is not a transition, nor an external alteration, but its own self-relating, which is the negativity of itself. 805. The determinations are no longer simply affirmative as in the sphere of being, but a sheer positedness. 806. Implicit being has vanished, and its unity is this simple self-relation only as a result of the sublating of this presupposition. Book 2. The Doctrine of Essence. 807. The truth of being is essence. 808. When this movement is pictured as the path of knowing, then this beginning appears to be an activity of knowing external to being. 809. But this path is the movement of being itself. 810. Essence is in this way only a product, an artifact. 811. Essence is neither in itself nor for itself. What it is through an other. 812. But essence as it has here come to be, is what it is, through a negativity which is not alien to it. 813. Absolute essence in this simple equality with itself has no determinate being. 814. In the whole of logic, essence occupies the same place as quantity does in the sphere of being. 815. Essence stands between being and notion, and its movement is the transition from being into the notion. 816. At first, essence shines or shows within itself, or is reflection. Secondly, it appears. Thirdly, it manifests itself. Section 1. Essence as reflection within itself. 817. Essence is first reflection. Secondly, we have essentialities. Thirdly, essence passes over into appearance. Chapter 1. Illusory being. 818. This immediate being is the unessential, but secondly, it is illusory being. Thirdly, reflection. The essential and the unessential. 819. Essence is sublated being. 820. But at the same time, being as contrasted with essence is the unessential. 821. The distinction of an essential and an unessential side in something has its origin in a third 822. The immediate that is still distinguished from essence is in and for itself a nullity. The illusory being 823. 1. The being of illusory being consists solely in the sublatedness of being in its nothingness. 824. Illusory being is all that still remains from the sphere of being. 825. Thus illusory being is the phenomenon of skepticism. 826. 2. Illusory being, therefore, contains an immediate presupposition, a side that is independent of essence. 827. It is the immediacy of non-being that constitutes illusory being. 828. The nothingness which yet is and the being which is only a moment constitute the moments of illusory being. 829. Illusory being is essence itself in the determinateness of being. 830. Illusory being is the negative that has a being, but in an other in its negation. 831. Illusory being, therefore, is essence itself but essence in a determinateness. 832. Essence in this its self-movement is reflection. See Reflection 833. Illusory being is the same thing as reflection, but it is reflection as immediate. 834. Essence is reflection, the movement of becoming and transition that remains internal to it. 835. Becoming is essence, its reflective movement is the movement of nothing to nothing and so back to itself. 836. Reflection is first positing reflection. Secondly, it is external reflection. But thirdly, it is determining reflection. A. Positing reflection 837. Illusory being is nothingness or the essenceless. But this nothingness or the essenceless does not have its being in another. 838. This self-related negativity of essence is just as much sublated negativity as it is negativity. 839. Reflection is the movement of nothing to nothing and is the negation that coincides with itself, self-negating equality. 840. Reflection is the movement that starts or returns only insofar as the negative has already returned into itself. 841. Reflection into self is essentially the presupposing of that from which it is the return. 842. Reflection finds before it an immediate which it transcends and from which it is the return. 843. The reflective movement is to be taken as an absolute recoil upon itself. 844. Reflection is itself and its non-being. 845. Since reflection has a presupposition and starts from the immediate as its other, it is external reflection. B. External reflection 846. External or real reflection presupposes itself as sublated. 847. External reflection therefore presupposes a being. 848. External reflection is the syllogism in which the two extremes are the immediate and reflection into self. The middle term connects the two. 849. The externality of reflection over against the immediate is sublated. Reflection is thus determining reflection. Remark 850. Reflection is usually taken in a subjective sense as the movement of the faculty of judgment beyond an immediate conception. 851. That reflection to which Kant ascribes the search of the universal of a given particular is clearly also only external reflection. 852. The immediate determinations of being are more readily granted to be transient, relative, but the reflected determinations count as essential. C. Determining reflection 853. 1. External reflection starts from immediate being, positing reflection from nothing. 854. What is posited is consequently an other, but in such a manner that the equality of reflection with itself is completely preserved. 855. 2. Positing is now in unity with external reflection. Positedness is thus a determination of reflection. 856. It is the equality of reflection with itself that possesses the negative only as negative, that enables the negative to persist. 857. By virtue of this reflection into self, the determinations of reflection appear as free essentialities floating in the void. 858. Essence does not go outside itself. The differences are simply posited. 859. 3. It is positedness, but as reflection into self, it is at the same time the sublatedness of this positedness. Chapter 2, The Determinations of Reflection, 860. Reflection is the showing of the illusory being of essence within essence itself. 861. Essence is at first pure identity. Secondly, difference, external or indifferent difference, diversity or opposed diversity, opposition. Thirdly, as contradiction, opposition reflected into itself and ground. Remark: A equals A. 862. These propositions ranked as the universal laws of thought that are absolute in themselves and incapable of proof. 863. Identity is enunciated in the proposition: everything is identical with itself, A equals A. 864. But a determinateness of being is essentially a transition into its opposite. 865. Since they are enunciated as universal laws of thought, they still require a subject of their relation. 866. These propositions are defective in that they have for subject being everything. 867. The several propositions which are set up as absolute laws of thought are opposed to one another.